Okay, so today we have Eva Laplace that we invited her already last year, but in the end we had to postpone. So Eva was working in Heidelberg before, and now she moved to Leuven, and is going to talk to us today about the stellar evolution of single and binary supernova progenitors.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for the invitation. And I'm really glad we could reschedule this talk. Yeah, so I'm very excited about this news. I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but like about this very nice idea of trying to detect the next galactic supernova as soon as possible. And basically, my main message today is that I think it's very important that if we do this, we don't forget about binaries. And that is because the next galactic supernova is actually very likely to be a binary product. And that has a number of consequences. And I hope to convince you during this talk that this is something to take into account and something that we need to think about. So yeah, if you have any questions during my talk, like feel free to interrupt me. I'm very happy to have some discussions. Yeah, so just let me know. Okay, so this is basically the takeaway from my talk already. But let's go into more detail here. So the reason I was saying this is basically if we look at the last supernova that happened nearby, I think one that of course immediately comes to mind is supernova 87A. We need to remember that this supernova, which was basically next door in this beautiful galaxy, the Large Magellanic Cloud, it was peculiar actually. It was completely unexpected, and it looked very different both from its explosion properties and from its progenitor from what people had been expecting. So this is this famous image that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, where there is the progenitor of the supernova, this little star in the middle, that was observed before the supernova went off. And then afterwards, you have a picture at the same location of the supernova. And this means that people were able to go back to archival images, have a look at this progenitor star, and there is now a consensus that this star, which happened to be a blue supergiant and not a red supergiant, as many had been expecting, and there is now a consensus that this is actually a binary merger product. And I'd like to convince you that these are actually not very rare, but they're actually quite common products of stellar evolution. So I work on stellar astrophysics. And in this field, we're very interested in understanding basically how stars evolve and how they end their lives. And we ask a lot of very fundamental questions. So how do stars evolve? Also, what do they leave behind? How do stars die? And a very interesting new focus in recent years has been, what about multiples? What about what happens when stars actually don't live alone, but live in multiple systems? And there's something I'd like to discuss with you today. So I'm particularly interested in massive stars, as is the focus here today. And that is because they're very exciting. They have a lot of influence on their surroundings through their strong winds, their outflows, but also their explosions. And of course, at the end of their lives, their cores collapse, and you're going to have some beautiful supernova explosions, leaving a supernova random behind, or you can even form a black hole. And this is, of course, very interesting nowadays because we can see black holes with gravitational waves there. And most massive stars live in binaries. And there is really a consensus about this. This really has been a shift in our thinking in recent years. There have been many studies that have confirmed that most massive stars live in binaries, and not only in binaries, but in binaries close enough that they will interact during their lifetime. So if you look at the most common massive stars around us, basically you can make this pie chart, and you find out that if you calculate back their binary fraction, you can figure out how many of them are single. And it turns out that it's a minority. Only 30% of these binaries are wide enough that they will never interact during their lifetime. And these are effectively single stars. Yeah. And that is because massive stars are born in multiple systems. This is a problem that hasn't been solved yet, exactly how that happens from the star formation perspective, but we do see them forming in multiple systems. So in binaries or even higher order multiples. What can also happen when these stars get close enough together is that you can get envelope stripping. So one star giving away some of its mass to its companion. The companion can get this mass, and then we call them accretors. So they accrete some mass, and in the same process, they actually accrete angular momentum, not only mass, which means that they spin up, they rotate fast, which also changes their properties. And quite a large fraction of them, of these massive stars, actually merge together and form a new star. And so all of these processes change the properties of stars and also changes what happens at the end of their lives. Another point is that if we only focus on these binary strip stars, which was the focus of my PhD at the time, they're actually really common. So it's really 30% of massive binary stars will end up being these binary strip stars. But what's really interesting about them is that we can model them quite reliably with some evolution codes nowadays. And another thing that makes them very interesting is that they're quite important for the formation of gravitational wave sources. So basically, all of these properties also tell us something about these gravitational waves you can see nowadays. And when you look at most common binary black hole mergers, it turns out that both black holes in the binary actually come from these binary strip stars. So these are quite a fun system to look at. And what's also interesting is that if you have a supernova in the process of forming this compact object, both of these supernovae will not be these typical like hydrogen-rich type 2 supernovae, but they will be strip supernovae. So all these things are connected and we can learn about this. But yeah, let's come back to the typical evolution of stars and how binaries change the story. So here is a Hertzsprung-Russell diagram, so effective temperature is a function of luminosity, where I show you the typical evolutionary track for a single star. So this is this gray line. And the typical evolution of a massive single star of about 10 solar masses or so is that it will expand during its lifetime, it will cool, and it will become a red supergiant and die at this star location here as a red supergiant. Now, if you take exactly the same star, but you put it in a binary system with another companion, what will happen to the star is shown in this purple line. And so in the beginning, everything is the same. But as the star evolves, and if it's the more massive component, will actually evolve faster than its companion. This means that it will reach this Hertzsprung gap phase where it expands greatly earlier. And as it expands, it will be able to fill its Roche lobe and transfer material to the companion star. And in the process, its luminosity and temperature change dramatically, and actually its entire structure. And so what's going to happen to this star, which had in the beginning exactly the same fate, the same track as this single star, is that it will actually become really tiny and really hot and be in this phase that is what we call a helium star phase or a strip star phase. And then at the end of the evolution, when it starts to have reached like further nuclear fusion stages, it will expand again, actually, after full helium burning. And then it will explode somewhere here, and maybe as a yellow supergiant or something like this, and then produce a supernova. Yeah. So basically, this just being in a binary, this binary mass transfer really affects the life and the death of these stars. We can repeat this exercise with many, many different systems, and it's something I've done in the past, but many other people have found this as well. If we look at many stars with many different initial masses, you can start to see some interesting effects. And that is that at the end of their lives, they actually line up on some line here. And we can understand why. And this means that the range of supernova properties that we expect here are quite large. Yeah, of the progenitor properties of the supernova are going to be very different for these low mass stars and for these high mass stars. Yes, someone has a question?
No, sorry.
Okay, that's fine.
Actually, if you're allowing questions, yeah. Eva, can I interrupt?
Of course, yeah, go for it.
Obviously, you can compare your models with observations. I presume you're going to do that. Okay.
Yes, I'm going to show you. Yes, and that's quite important, in fact. Yes. Yeah, so we can also go to, so this was at solar metal state, actually, but we can go to even lower metal state. And there you can see an even different story. When the stars retain a lot of hydrogen, they will actually be able to expand quite a lot. And then if they don't interact before they explode, they will again line up and form these red supergiants. So if we really want to understand the outcome of this binary evolution, we really need to go to even population studies and to simulate thousands of different binary systems following both of the evolution of the primary component, the secondary component, and then try to see what happens at the end. And then we can compare with observations, which was exciting. And so this is what we've done with my collaborator, Abhishai Gilkit. And this was just submitted and should appear on arXiv tomorrow. And this was a really gigantic study following the evolution of both components in a binary system for a population of binaries, and where we try to understand what the final fate of each component is and how they're going to appear, like where they're going to appear on the HR diagram when they reach their core clocks. And so you can see that it actually has a huge parameter space. Yeah, it spans a huge parameter space. We can see that you have, like, there are a lot of colors here. I don't want you to get to focus on the details, but the main point is that, so the black symbols are the black hole progenitors. You have a huge diversity in these locations of the supernovae, but also of the black holes, black hole progenitors. And if we compare with observed supernovae, they line up actually quite nicely. I think here I'm not showing all of the models. This is just at one metallicity. But we can, and here I'm not comparing to all of the supernovae. I'm sorry, I'm not showing the right plot, I guess. But we also did compare to observed supernovae, and it's quite nice to see that we can reproduce some of the diversity there. So there are quite a few supernovae nowadays where we have observed progenitors with some limits on the progenitors. There's quite a few yellow supergiants, there are a few red supergiants, and there are a few blue supergiants, like 87A. And you can connect them back to whether it was the primary star that exploded or the secondary star that exploded, or even a merger product. Yeah, so I think it's just as a takeaway, don't only look at the single stars, which I think is a very valuable effort in any case, but we need to think a little bit broader when we think of stars that are going to explode as supernovae. Okay, so as a takeaway, this part of the talk is that binary mass transfer affects the life and the death of stars. Sorry. Yeah, and then I'd like to move on to something, to a more fundamental question. Because basically what I've talked about so far is just effects of the surface layers, right? I'm only talking about the appearance of the progenitor before it explodes. So the question is, would this actually matter for the other properties of the explosion, for the neutrino emission? Would it matter for the potential gravitational wave emission from supernova progenitor? And would it also matter for the nuclear synthesis? And so this is something I've also been looking into with collaborators in recent years. And we've looked at strip stars, we've also looked at accretors and even mergers. And we've found some interesting results. So one of the main things that we found is that for quite a number of systems, the mass transfer actually changes the entire core structure of the star. And this is visualized in this diagram here, where on the left, you see a single star, and you see its nuclear burning structure, shown on this 2D half moon plot, basically. And the colored regions show you the strengths of nuclear burning in these layers. And so basically, this is an evolved stage. So you have some hydrogen burning, you have some helium shell burning, some carbon shell burning, and in the center, this star is burning oxygen. And we're comparing this to a star that has exactly the same core mass, so this helium core here, but that has been stripped during its life. And it turns out that its entire structure, also the nuclear burning structure, is different compared to the single star. So these are systematically different systems. And this has a lot of very interesting consequences. If we look at the final composition of these stars, we can see this represented on these diagrams on the left. And these diagrams give you an idea of the composition of the star in every layer of the star. So to understand these diagrams, basically here we're plotting the star as a set of concentric circles. And the radius of this circle here is proportional to the mass, to the enclosed mass in the star. And for each layer, you can read it as a pie chart. So the outer layers that you see here I'm only focusing on the core, by the way. These outer layers have these lighter elements, so helium and carbon. And in the inner layers, this is what we call the carbon oxygen core, or the oxygen magnesium core. You can have different heavier elements that have been created through nuclear fusion in the inner layers of the star. And in the center is what we call the iron core, which is of course just a collection of heavy elements, which are mostly iron group elements. And if we compare the composition of a single star core and of a strip star core at the end of the evolution, we can see that there are systematic differences. And what's very interesting is that the strip star has a carbon oxygen layer here that is absent in this single star. And that is because of the effect of mass transfer. The evolution of the core is actually quite different. Instead of having a convective core that will grow in mass, you have a core that will shrink. And this will leave these burning products of the nuclear fusion behind. So you have a gradient of carbon and oxygen around this oxygen magnesium core. And this has actually quite fun consequences, because during the supernova explosion, you'll of course also create new elements through supernova nuclear synthesis. And what we found is that these strip stars are actually much better at producing carbon, the carbon-12 that we're made of, or that every organic life is made of, is actually much easier to produce in these strip stars compared to single stars. And it's because the supernova shock actually cools down quite rapidly once it reaches these layers. And so this pure carbon and oxygen layer is barely affected by the supernova shock, and it will be ejected during the supernova explosion, enriching the universe with more carbon. We also made these calculations for many, many different elements, and we found that there are some really interesting patterns there, for example, in potassium, that could explain some of the observed yield discrepancies. And this is just because of this different core structure. So I actually don't know what this would mean for the neutrino emission or for the gravitational wave emission from these systems. But I think, I strongly suspect that we would also see quite some differences there for these binary products. So our models are public, so everyone's welcome to use them and to try to find out if there are differences. We also looked at different binary products. So I just talked about strip stars before. I'm sorry, there's this bar in the way, this bar, okay. And we can also see these differences in the core structure for stars that are the accretors, so that have gained mass from a companion in a binary, or that have merged together with another star in a binary. And so we can also find very interesting differences there. Essentially, even if you have a similar core, when these stars accrete a lot of mass, the structure is going to change, because this mass is basically exerting additional pressure. And so this nuclear burning structure, especially here in this helium shell or hydrogen shell, is going to be quite different. And if you accrete more and more mass, which is what is shown here on this panel here, you will find that the complete structure of the star will change. So the star will turn from a red supergiant into a blue supergiant. So that is quite interesting. Here it looks like it's bigger, but this is because this is in mass coordinate. So essentially the way you will see the star is that it will be a more compact, very blue luminous star. But the interior is basically the same. And the difference is that because we added so much hydrogen on top of the star, because of this merging of two stars, you will have a lot of pressure from the outer layer, from this massive envelope. And that will trigger a huge nuclear burning shell here to ignite, this hydrogen burning shell. And it will be so strong, the burning will be so strong, that it will trigger convection. And that will change the structure of the star. And so instead of having a large convective envelope, like a red supergiant, it will have a convective layer above this hydrogen shell, and the rest of the layers will be radiative. And so from the outside, it will look like a blue supergiant. Yeah, and so basically, if we compare it to a single star with the same initial mass, these stars will have a very different core to total mass ratio. And that has also some interesting consequences for the type of supernovae we expect, even for the supernovae light curves. And that's some ongoing work we're doing, where we're trying to predict the differences. So as a takeaway, binary mass transfer also affects the deep interior, the composition and the nuclear synthesis of stars. And the final point I'd like to make is that these binary effects really have very interesting consequences also for the compact objects that are formed. And that is because since we change the core structure of stars, we actually change what they turn into. We change the compact object they form. So this is the question here. So how will we change whether a star is going to explode as a supernova or form a black hole? And we actually find that this has actually quite a big impact. So usually we have this typical picture in mind when we think of the final fate of stars, that lower mass stars will form white dwarfs, and then as you increase in mass, will form like a neutron star, and then all the higher mass stars will form a black hole. But the actual picture is a bit more complicated than that. It turns out that some stars form black holes, some stars explode, some stars form black holes again. And this is, if we ignore the orange line for now, but only focus on the blue line, this is typically summarized in this compactness parameter. So the compactness gives you an idea of how compact the core is at the end of the life of a star, or basically it's also the same thing as how tightly bound is the star, or how tightly bound is the core at the moment of explosion. And if it's very, very tightly bound, it's going to be much harder to explode it. And it's also directly correlates with the iron core mass of stars. So this compactness parameter, you can also read it as iron core mass. Some stars will have high iron core masses, some stars will have low iron core masses. And what's very exciting is that actually, basically everyone who has looked at this, who has made these type of calculations, have found the same thing. Everyone finds the same pattern. In a recent work, we think we can explain why. We found some mechanism that explains the structure, and it has to do with the type of nuclear fusion cycles that stars get through at the end of their lives. But I'm not going to get into it here. But the main point is, so here under this line, we expect stars to form neutron stars. Above this line, we expect stars to form black holes, like let's say as a very rough estimate here. Of course, the actual picture is more complicated. But what is very interesting is that if we look at binary products, we find exactly the same pattern, this orange line, but it is shifted. It's systematically shifted. And this is again coming back to this nuclear burning structure of these stars. That is because these stars have formed different cores, basically, different cores that are more compact for higher masses compared to single stars. And this systematic shift has a lot of consequences, because here we're only looking at the final core mass. And if you translate it to initial mass, you'll find that to form a black hole, basically, in these strip stars, you need to go to quite high masses. And so for these strip stars, we also find that it's actually quite easy to form a neutron star, most likely, or to have the star be quite explodable. So we are opening up the parameter space for explosions when we look at these stars that are stripped in binary systems. We also looked at accretors and mergers, and we found very similar effects, but then in the other direction. And so all of this together means that we expect stars that are interacting binary systems to form a different population of compact objects compared to single stars. And we, in general, expect them to be quite explodable. So we expect a lot of supernovae from these. Yeah, so the takeaway here is that binary mass transfer also changes the final fate of stars. Okay, and so based on all of these points, I believe we really need to remember that binaries play a large role and investigate their effects for also for early signals and multi-messenger signals for the next galactic supernova. So yeah, let's not forget about the binary effects. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eva. That was a very nice talk. So I see several hands. Alec.
Yeah, so thinking about ways to test that nice graph you had in the last slide showing that shift towards neutron starness. Yeah.
Yes.
So of course the only compact objects we have good masses for are ones in tight binary systems, which are the orange line, and we don't have good masses for the blue line.
Absolutely.
But in terms of the rate of neutron star or black hole formation in the galaxy, or the supernova rates and things like that, does that provide any constraints to this picture that would help validate this?
Yes, we actually looked at this in a paper that will come out tomorrow. So we compared also the rates a little bit, and it seems to be quite in line with also the diversity of the supernovae types. So that's quite interesting. And something I didn't explain or that I didn't get into at all here is that we also compared to the distribution of compact objects seen by LIGO Virgo. And so this is a completely different work, but we actually predicted that because of this effect, because of this compactness peak, basically this or iron core mass peak, that you expect in these binaries for these binary black hole mergers, because both of the black holes come from these binary strip stars, we actually expect that their black hole masses will be universal. So that means that they will have the same black hole masses, the distribution. If you look at the overall distribution, most of them will line up at similar black hole masses. And this actually doesn't change much with metallicity. So that's why we call it universal. And what's very interesting is that when we compare it to the LIGO data, we find that the distribution seems to align quite well with our predictions, which is basically at chirp masses of 9 and 16 solar masses, we expect a peak. And in between, we expect that there are not so many systems. And this seems to be in the data. So this is quite exciting, but we'll verify this with the next data release. So this makes me quite confident that there's overlap here. And the other piece of evidence comes from a completely different angle that comes from disappearing stars. So you know that there have been some monitoring campaigns to find stars that disappear and hopefully form black holes. And when we put the two systems that have been claimed so far on our diagrams, they line up actually really well with these predictions for this compactness peak, for where we expect stars to form black holes. So yeah, based on this, we think that we're in the right direction. So the location of this peak is actually quite dependent on, for example, nuclear physics uncertainties. So we're not exactly sure where it lies, but so far predictions seem to be very much in line with observation. So it's quite exciting.
Okay, cool, thanks.
Any other questions to Eva?
Actually, can I ask a follow-up on that one? So just population surveys indicate that 90% of core collapse supernova are type 2p. So
yes,
that would say that they're not stripped. So I'm trying to understand how that matches up with what you were saying in this talk, that most stars are gonna have some sort of interaction and a lot of them get stripped.
Yes. So maybe I wasn't clear here, and I'm sorry about the confusion. So only 30% of these binaries will be stripped. And I think that lines up actually quite nicely with the rate of stripped envelope supernovae, which of the whole core collapse supernova rate, they're about 30%. But a lot of these binary products are actually these accretors and mergers. And if we take that into account, they contribute a lot to the type 2, to these hydrogen-rich core supernovae.
I see.
So if we take all of that into account, so yeah, I'm sorry if I was confusing about because I talk a lot about the strip stars because that was the subject of my PhD, but here I was talking globally about all the binary products.
Since no one else is talking, you asked a question about how binary interactions may affect the neutrino signal. Unless they really change the compactness of the core, then
yeah,
I don't expect. Evan can chime in as well, but I don't expect that the neutrino signal will change that much.
Yeah, so I think the compactness is one of the aspects. The other aspect I completely ignored here. Well, two other aspects. One is the rotation. The rotation profile might actually also change the energetics here and the magnetic fields. So for these stellar mergers, we actually have some evidence that the products of stellar mergers will produce magnetized cores. And in that context, I think you might expect that this also affects the neutrino signal, though I'm not an expert on this subject.
So some recent studies on the effect of magnetic fields upon the supernova are indicating it, even with quite large fields, it doesn't really affect it beyond the 10% level. But
okay, so it's just a 10% effect. Okay.
It's about that, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think from that is the I think the first order effect is really this landscape here, that you'll have actually quite a large parameter space for forming neutron star progenitors and also quite massive neutron stars. So we're not exactly sure how much we can trust our models here, because it depends quite a lot on the supernova mechanism. But yeah, if this is real, this really opens up a parameter space for the type of supernova that you can get, and the type of neutron star you will find. Yeah, so I'd be excited to check this with people who are really experts on this, to see if there is really a noticeable effect, or if there would be a signature even, potentially, of a star that experienced binary interaction.
Any other questions?
I guess I just have a comment. I'm just walking home with my kids, so it's hard to formulate questions, but excellent talk. And I look forward to seeing the paper in a couple of days.
Yeah, good. Thank you.
Good. So yeah, very nice talk. It was very interesting and a lot of new things.